Humanity's first contact with the interstellar dominion was not a moment of awe and discovery, as many had dreamed. It was conquest, cold and calculated, devoid of compassion or negotiation. Their ships appeared in the skies without warning, massive and ominous, their hulls gleaming with alien precision. The heavens burned as beams of light rained down, slicing through Earth's orbital defenses with merciless efficiency. In mere minutes, everything we had built to protect ourselves was reduced to ash and silence. They didn't come with greetings or promises of unity. They came with chains. To them, humanity was insignificant, a species barely worth the effort of diplomacy. Weapons were deemed unnecessary against such a harmless people. Their arrogance was absolute, their domination swift. Then came the drones. They descended from the ships like locusts, sleek and mechanical, their movements unnervingly smooth. Their glowing eyes scanned everything in their path, cold and unfeeling. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They stripped Earth bare without pause, tearing through our cities, forests, and oceans with the precision of a machine that has no concept of life. Resources were taken without care, samples were seized without explanation, and our people were abducted without mercy. I remember the day they came for my sister, Mia. She was just a child, her laughter still bright in a world that had already begun to crumble. The chaos around her was too much for her young mind to comprehend. I can still hear her screams, sharp and desperate, as the Dominion's machines dragged her into the sky. Her small hands clawed at the air, reaching for us, for safety, for home. But the transport beam swallowed her whole, a sterile light that erased her from our world. The light faded, and she was gone. Her face still haunts me. The way her white eyes begged for help, the way her voice cracked as she called my name, it is a memory that will never leave me. It is carved into my soul, raw and unyielding, a scar that time cannot heal. The Dominion didn't care. To them, we were nothing more than data points in a vast equation. They categorized us like insects, assigning labels to our biology, our intelligence, our worth. They contained us, placing Earth under biosphere restoration protocols, the cold, sterile term that masked the suffocation of an entire species. They dismissed us as insignificant, a primitive race too weak to resist, too fragile to matter. But they made the oldest mistake in history, they underestimated the conquered. We knew what their promises meant. Humanity remembered the lessons of its own bloody past, the scars left by colonization, genocide, and oppression. We knew what it meant when someone else decided your future, when someone else claimed the right to dictate who deserved to live and who would be erased. The Dominion called it restoration, but we saw the truth. They weren't saving Earth, they were silencing it. They weren't preserving humanity, they were erasing us. They thought we would accept it. They thought we would die quietly, suffocated by their rules and crushed under their machines. But they didn't understand what happens when you push humans to the edge. Humans don't stay down. We are fragile, yes. We bleed easily. We break under pressure. But there is something they didn't account for, something that runs deeper than our fragility. When you push us far enough, something changes. The cracks don't spread, they harden. The pieces don't shatter, they sharpen. We have always been a species defined by struggle. Throughout history, humanity has faced oppression, exploitation, and destruction. And in every case, we have found a way to rise. It is not because we are invincible, or because we are stronger than those who seek to destroy us. It is because we refuse to accept defeat. It is because, when everything is taken from us, we find a fire within ourselves that cannot be extinguished. Humans don't stay down. You push us far enough, we stop breaking, we sharpen. The Dominion didn't understand the fire they had lit. They didn't see the rage simmering beneath the surface, the desperation fueling our every breath. They didn't hear the whispers spreading through the ruins of our cities, the quiet promises of vengeance. But they would. And when they did, they would regret ever calling us harmless. This is the lesson they failed to learn, the truth they ignored in their arrogance. Humanity is not defined by its weakness. It is defined by its resilience. It is defined by its ability to endure, to adapt, to rise from the ashes of its own destruction. The Dominion thought they could break us, but all they did was forge us into something sharper, something stronger. History has shown this time and time again. Oppression breeds resistance. Arrogance sows the seeds of rebellion. And those who underestimate the will of the oppressed will always face the consequences of their hubris. The Dominion thought they were invincible. They thought their power was absolute. But they forgot the most important lesson of all: the human spirit cannot be conquered. It can be battered, bruised, and broken, but it will always find a way to rise. And when it does, it is unstoppable. This was their fatal error. And it would be their undoing. Part 2, Shadows of Resistance. They thought Earth would die quietly, suffocated under their cold, calculated restoration protocols. They believed humanity would crumble, too weak and fractured to resist their dominion. But they misunderstood us. They mistook silence for submission, grief for defeat. Instead of fading into obscurity, humanity adapted. Far from the glittering cities the Dominion had sterilized, where their gaze was weakest, humanity found new purpose. On the fringes of their empire, mining colonies once barren outposts of human expansion became fortresses. These places, forgotten and abandoned by both conquerors and the conquered, became sanctuaries for rebellion. In the dim light of underground tunnels and rusted corridors, we scavenged what we could from the ruins of our civilization. We stripped their technology bare, peeling back layers of alien complexity to uncover the power hidden within. Their tools, once symbols of their superiority, became the foundation of our resistance. We twisted their machines into weapons, their energy sources into bombs. Every stolen piece of technology became a testament to human ingenuity, a reminder that even in despair, we could create. Their arrogance, their dismissal of us as insignificant, became the fuel for our rage. And in that rage, we found clarity. Grief became ingenuity. Rage became strategy. I remember Elias. He was a quiet man before the invasion, a teacher in one of Earth's smaller cities. He spent his days guiding children through lessons, teaching them to dream of futures filled with possibility. But when the Dominion came, his city was erased in a single flash of orbital fire. The streets where he walked every morning, the school where he inspired young minds, the home where his family waited for him, all of it was gone. There was no time for mourning, no bodies to bury, no ruins to rebuild. For Elias, grief was not a wound, it was a void, consuming and endless. But Elias did not let that void swallow him. He didn't build a grave for his city, he built a forge. Deep beneath the surface of a barren moon, hidden from the Dominion's watchful eyes, Elias worked tirelessly. The forge burned with stolen energy cores, its fires roaring like the heartbeat of rebellion. His hands, scarred and blistered, shaped broken metal into blades and shields. His face, shadowed by exhaustion, was lit by the fierce glow of determination. Every piece of scrap he touched became something new, a weapon, a promise, a spark of hope. The forge was more than a place of creation, it was a symbol. It whispered to all who saw it that transformation was possible, even in the face of annihilation. Elias didn't just make weapons, he made a promise to the dead, a vow that their loss would not be in vain. Some whispered that we were becoming monsters, that our thirst for vengeance was poisoning us. They said we were losing our humanity in the darkness, that our grief had turned us into something unrecognizable. Perhaps they were right. Grief has no conscience. It doesn't ask permission or offer forgiveness. It demands action. And in those shadows, we made a choice: survival over our soul. The first strike was more than a blow, it was a message. A Dominion freighter, heavy with supplies and arrogance, drifted through the outer systems, its antimatter core humming with untapped power. The freighter exploded in an instant, igniting the black void of space like a newborn sun. The blast was a symphony of fire and destruction, its light stretching across the stars. The Dominion dismissed it as an accident, a malfunction of their flawless technology. Their arrogance blinded them to the truth. And that blindness bought us precious time. In the depths of forgotten worlds, underground armies began to form. They were ragged and desperate, their ranks filled with survivors and outcasts. There were no uniforms, no banners, no glory, only rage. Across 6 systems, whispers spread like wildfire, carrying a single promise: never again. But the resistance was not born from anger alone. It was nurtured by shadows, fueled by fury, and guided by the lessons of history. Humanity had faced oppression before on Earth, in its own bloody past. We knew the cost of silence, the price of submission. We remembered the scars left by colonization, exploitation, and genocide. And we understood that survival was not enough. To truly live, we had to reclaim what was stolen, to rise against those who sought to erase us. Every strike was a reminder that humanity would not be erased. Every act of defiance was a declaration that we would not bow. The Dominion thought they had crushed us, but they had only forged us into something stronger. In the darkness, we sharpened ourselves into something they could never control. And in time, they would learn to fear us. The colony we reclaimed was a place forgotten by the stars, hidden within jagged cliffs and surrounded by lifeless wastelands. To the Dominion, it was nothing, a speck on the map, a sterile facility where their experiments could proceed uninterrupted. It held no strategic value, no resources worth fighting for, no beauty to admire. But to us, it was a wound that refused to heal, a scar etched deep into the soul of humanity. The stories that reached us were whispered in the shadows, passed from trembling lips to ears that could barely bear to listen. They spoke of men and women dragged from their homes under the cover of darkness, stripped of their names, their identities, their dignity. The Dominion didn't see them as people, they saw them as tools, as specimens to be dissected, studied, and discarded. Inside those cold, sterile walls, humanity was reduced to numbers and data points, its spirit crushed under the weight of their indifference. The screams echoed long after the voices had been silenced, haunting the memories of those who managed to escape. Survivors described the facility as a place where hope went to die, where the Dominion's cruelty stripped away every last shred of humanity. It wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of everything they thought we had become: weak, broken, disposable. We didn't reclaim the colony for territory. We didn't need its barren land or its forgotten location. We didn't care about its strategic importance. We took it for something far greater, something no empire could measure or quantify. We took it for our dignity. The assault began under the cover of night, when the stars hung heavy in the sky, indifferent to the chaos below. We moved like shadows, silent and unseen, our hearts pounding with the weight of what we were about to do. Every step was defiance, every breath an act of rebellion. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the unspoken promise that this would not be the end, it would only be the beginning. The Dominion's garrison was small, complacent, and utterly unprepared for the storm that descended upon them. They had grown arrogant, believing their power made them untouchable. But arrogance is a fragile shield against desperation. The battle wasn't clean, it wasn't meant to be. It was chaos, raw and unrelenting, a collision of fury and survival. The sterile halls of the facility, once cold and lifeless, erupted into a cacophony of violence. The Dominion soldiers fought back with precision and discipline, but their tactics crumbled under the sheer force of our desperation. We weren't soldiers, we were survivors. And survival has no rules. The air grew thick with smoke as the fires spread, consuming everything in their path, their machines, their experiments, their arrogance. The flames roared like a living thing, their light casting eerie shadows on the walls, shadows that danced like spirits finally freed from their torment. The facility, once a monument to their cruelty, became a pyre for their pride. When the last of their garrison fell, silence descended upon the ruins, heavy and suffocating. We left them a message, scrawled in ash across the remains of their empire, harmless. You were warned. I stood among the destruction, watching the flames devour what remained. The heat pressed against my skin, but it couldn't thaw the cold inside me. Satisfaction filled me, not the warm glow of pride or the fleeting rush of joy, but something deeper, something harder. It was the cold reclaiming of something they had tried to steal from us, our humanity. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. It was a reminder that dignity cannot be taken, it can only be surrendered. And we refused to surrender. The Dominion didn't understand. They couldn't comprehend the significance of what we had done. To them, it was an anomaly, a mistake, a fleeting act of defiance that meant nothing in the grand scheme of their empire. They blamed pirates, mercenaries, rogue factions, anything but humans acting with such coordination and ferocity. Their arrogance blinded them to the truth. But their blindness was our advantage. Their refusal to see us as a threat bought us time to prepare, time to strike again, time to remind them, over and over, that humanity was far from broken. The flames that consumed the facility were not just destruction, they were rebirth. From the ashes of what they had tried to destroy, we rose, unyielding and unbroken. We were no longer the victims of their cruelty, we were the architects of their downfall. And as the fires burned, I realized something. The battle wasn't just about reclaiming a colony, it was about reclaiming ourselves. It was about proving that even in the face of annihilation, humanity could endure. It was about reminding the Dominion, and ourselves, that dignity is not a gift, it is a right. We were survivors, yes. But more than that, we were human. And no empire, no matter how vast or powerful, could ever take that away. Commander Dax stood before us, his presence commanding the room like a storm gathering strength. His voice carried no promises of hope, no dreams of liberation. Those ideals had long since been buried beneath a weight of loss and betrayal. Instead, he spoke of fire that would consume the stars and leave behind only ash. His words were sharp, cutting through the silence like the edge of a blade. Operation Iron Storm was not a campaign for conquest, it was vengeance incarnate, a 12-colony offensive designed to erase, not to claim. We don't want their worlds, Dax declared, his voice cold and unyielding. We want their blood. The room was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes breathing feel like a burden. His words hung in the air, undeniable, inescapable. There was no hesitation in his tone, no room for doubt. He wasn't asking for our allegiance, he was commanding it. And we gave it, not because we believed in victory, but because we believed in the anger that burned within us. It was an anger that had festered for years, fed by the loss of our homes, our families, our futures. My assignment was Althean 7, a world celebrated across the Dominion for its beauty and culture. It was a beacon of prosperity, a hub where art flourished and commerce thrived. Its marble halls gleamed under the golden sunlight, its streets alive with a hum of life and laughter. To the Dominion, Althean 7 was a jewel, a symbol of their supremacy. To us, it was a wounded reminder of everything they had stolen from us. The assault began at dawn, as the first rays of sunlight painted the planet's surface in shades of gold. But there was no warmth in that light, no comfort. It was the light of destruction, of fire, and fury. We descended upon the city like shadows, moving silently and swiftly, our hearts pounding with the weight of what we were about to do. The marble halls, once pristine and majestic, were soon bathed in crimson as the fires spread, their flames licking at the walls like hungry beasts. Statues of their leaders, carved with painstaking detail, crumbled under the heat, their faces melting into grotesque forms. The streets, once bustling with life and color, became a graveyard of shattered glass and scorched stone. We weren't just destroying their industry, we were dismantling their pride. Every act of violence was deliberate, every stroke of destruction calculated. We wanted them to feel it, to understand the depth of our fury. "You stole our future," I whispered to myself as I watched the flames consume the city. "We're taking your pride." But amidst the chaos, I saw her, a Dominion child, no older than 7, standing frozen in the firelight. Her hair was tangled, her face streaked with soot, her white eyes reflecting the inferno that surrounded her. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, silent, staring at the destruction we had wrought. Her gaze pierced through me, cutting deeper than any knife. For a moment, time seemed to stop, the roar of the flames fading into an eerie silence. I told myself she deserved it, that her people had brought this upon themselves. I told myself that vengeance was justice. But the words felt hollow, as though they were crumbling inside me just like the marble walls around her. We had become their nightmare, the monsters they whispered about in the dark. And some of us stopped caring. The Dominion's retaliation was swift and merciless. They unleashed sterilization squads, soldiers trained not to fight, but to erase. Entire colonies were wiped out, their populations reduced to nothing more than numbers on a report. Bounties were placed on our heads, our faces broadcast across their screens, our names cursed in their homes. But by then, we had nothing left to lose. We had already sacrificed our humanity for the sake of vengeance. What more could they take from us? As I stood amidst the ruins of Altheon 7, the smoke thick in the air, the screams of the dying echoing in my ears, I realized something that chilled me to my core. This wasn't liberation. It wasn't justice. It was a storm of rage and despair, sweeping through the stars, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. And I was part of it. I thought about the child, her white eyes staring into the flames. I thought about the statues crumbling, the streets reduced to rubble, the lives erased in the name of vengeance. Was this who we were now? Were we still human, or had we become something else, something darker, something colder? Dax's words echoed in my mind, but now they felt heavier, more sinister. We don't want their worlds. We want their blood. But blood was never enough. It couldn't bring back what we had lost. It couldn't heal the scars carved into our souls. It couldn't rebuild the futures they had stolen. And as the fires burned, I wondered if vengeance was just another chain, binding us to the very pain we sought to escape. In the end, the storm would consume us all. The rebellion spread like wildfire, fierce and unrelenting, consuming everything in its path. It began as whispers carried through shadowed corridors, murmurs of defiance that clung to the air like the scent of rain before a storm. These whispers were fragile at first, trembling with doubt and fear, but they were persistent. They grew louder, gathering strength as they traveled, until they became shouts that echoed across the stars. And when those shouts turned into roars, deep, guttural cries of anger and desperation, the galaxy itself seemed to tremble. For too long, the Dominion had ruled with an iron fist, smothering entire civilizations under its suffocating grip. But now, the oppressed were rising. Across countless worlds, species that had once cowered in silence began to stand tall. It was as if humanity had become a flame in the void, a beacon that pierced through the darkness, illuminating the possibility of freedom. Our defiance, born from desperation, had become something greater than ourselves. It was no longer just about survival, it was about hope. The Zalith were among the first to answer the call. Their kind had always been proud and ferocious, their skin a deep black that shimmered like polished obsidian under the light of foreign suns. They were warriors by nature, and when they joined the rebellion, they did so with a ferocity that shook even us. They painted their armor with grotesque patterns of human muscle, vivid and unsettling, designed to strike fear into the hearts of Dominion patrols. These painted warriors marched into battle like giants, their forms gleaming like black mirrors beneath alien skies. To the Dominion, the Zalith were monsters, their painted bodies a horrifying mockery of human resilience. But to us, they were allies, proof that our rebellion had transcended the boundaries of species and culture. They fought not just for their own freedom, but for the idea that no one should live in chains. Then there were the Varn, a species as cold and calculating as the void itself. Where the Zalith wielded brute strength, the Varn wielded intellect. They were not warriors, they were strategists, thinkers, manipulators. Their minds worked with a precision that bordered on the mechanical, each thought a cog in a vast, intricate machine. When the Varn defected, they did so without fanfare or spectacle. They did not bring guns or ships to the fight, they brought knowledge. They fed us intelligence, maps of Dominion strongholds, schematics of their defenses, secrets hidden within layers of bureaucracy. Their betrayal was silent and invisible, but its impact was devastating. The Dominion had relied on the Varn's loyalty for centuries, and when that loyalty shattered, it left cracks in their foundation that no amount of power could repair. With each new ally, our rebellion grew stronger. We were no longer victims, no longer the broken remnants of conquered worlds. We had become symbols of rebellion, of hope, of the possibility that the Dominion was not invincible. Commander Dax called it Phase Zero, the tipping point when an uprising becomes irreversible. Once the fire starts, he said, it spreads. It consumes everything in its path. And we had started the fire. But fire is a dangerous thing. It gives light and warmth, but it also destroys. As the rebellion spread, we began to see the darker side of what we had unleashed. The Zalith, emboldened by their newfound strength, began to push beyond the bounds of rebellion. Their painted warriors became beasts of destruction, their battles fueled not just by the desire for freedom, but by the thrill of conquest. The Varn, with their cold precision, began to manipulate the rebellion for their own gain, sowing seeds of distrust among allies. What had started as a fight for freedom was becoming something darker, something uncontrollable. Commander Dax understood this better than anyone. One evening, as the fires of rebellion burned across the galaxy, he stood before us, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. We inspired them, he said, his eyes searching each of us. But inspiration carries responsibility. The fire we lit will burn long after the Dominion is gone. And we must decide what kind of world we want to leave behind. His words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. They were not a call to arms, but a reminder, a warning. Rebellion was not just about tearing down the old. It was about building something new, something better. And that required more than anger. It required vision, compassion, and the courage to face the consequences of our actions. As the rebellion spread, I saw the truth in Dax's words. The fire we had lit was beautiful, fierce, and terrifying. It illuminated the darkness, but it also consumed everything in its path. I watched as alliances began to fray, as the lines between rebellion and chaos blurred. The Zalith, once symbols of strength, became symbols of fear. The Varn, once our trusted allies, became shadows in the dark, their motives impossible to decipher. And through it all, the Dominion continued to crumble, its once mighty empire reduced to ashes. But as I watched the galaxy burn, I couldn't shake the question that haunted me. Had we truly brought freedom, or had we simply replaced one kind of tyranny with another? The fire we had started was unstoppable now, a force of nature that cared nothing for morality or justice. It would burn until there was nothing left to consume. And when the flames finally died, what would remain? Would we find a world reborn or a galaxy reduced to ash? In the end, rebellion is not just about fighting. It is about choosing. Choosing who we want to be, what we want to create, and what we are willing to sacrifice to get there. And perhaps that is the greatest challenge of all, not the fight itself, but the aftermath. The fire we lit will burn long after we are gone. And it is up to those who come after us to decide whether it will be a beacon or a warning. The Dominion had ruled for centuries, their empire sprawling across the stars like an unyielding shadow. They were untouchable, their grip on power absolute, their authority unquestioned. But empires built on fear and cruelty are destined to crumble, and the Dominion was no exception. The rebellion had spread farther and faster than anyone could have anticipated, ignited by the desperate hunger for freedom that burned within every oppressed soul. Betrayals from within their ranks had fractured their once solid foundation, and the galaxy itself seemed to rise against them, piece by piece. The Dominion's desperation reached its peak, and with it came their darkest act, the unveiling of Eclipse Protocol. Eclipse Protocol was not a weapon in a traditional sense. It was an instrument of total annihilation, a cold and calculating machine suspended in orbit, silent and lifeless except for the artificial intelligence that controlled it. The platform had no emotion, no morality, no hesitation. It was designed with one purpose: to erase life. Entire planetary atmospheres could be sterilized in hours, leaving nothing behind but barren wastelands. It was power beyond comprehension, cruelty given form, and the Dominion wielded it without shame. To them, Eclipse Protocol was their salvation, their final gambit to crush rebellion and reassert their dominance. But to us, it was the embodiment of tyranny's ultimate arrogance, the belief that fear could silence hope. Draven was the one who uncovered the truth. He was more than an ally, he was a man of sharp intellect and unwavering resolve, someone who could see the threads of the Dominion's plans even when they were tangled in layers of deception. What he discovered chilled us all. Eclipse Protocol wasn't just meant for us, the rebels who had risen to fight for freedom. The Dominion intended to turn the weapon inward first, to burn their own worlds, their own people. They would silence dissent within their empire before unleashing the platform's fury on the rest of the galaxy. It was a twisted logic born of fear, the kind of fear that drives tyranny to destroy itself in its relentless pursuit of control. I could almost picture it, the cold, mechanical platform hanging in orbit above a bustling city, its shadow stretching across the ground like the hand of death. The AI would calculate the most efficient way to extinguish life, its algorithms indifferent to the cries of the innocent. Forests would ignite, oceans would boil, and entire civilizations would vanish in a matter of hours. The Dominion had crossed a line that could never be forgiven, never forgotten. They had chosen fire as their mercy, and in doing so, they had sealed their fate. We knew what had to be done. The Requiem Offensive was our answer, a desperate and brutal assault to destroy Eclipse Protocol before it could unleash its horrors. The battle was chaos incarnate, a nightmare that seemed to stretch on forever. The skies were alive with swarms of drones, their metallic forms glinting like shards of glass under the light of distant stars. They moved with terrifying precision, each one a piece of the Dominion's will, cold and unyielding. Their AI minds were connected in a vast network, a reflection of the soulless tyranny they served. The air itself seemed to burn. Planetary-scale fire rained down from above, scorching the ground and filling the atmosphere with ash and smoke. It was suffocating, the heat and destruction pressing down on us like a physical weight. The screams of the dying were everywhere, a symphony of pain and despair that threatened to drown out even the roar of battle. Every inch of progress was paid for in blood, every victory overshadowed by the cost. And yet, we pressed on. We fought with everything we had: ships, weapons, and sheer determination, because the alternative was unthinkable. If we failed, the galaxy would burn. Draven was a constant presence in the chaos, his voice steady and commanding as he rallied our forces. His face was etched with grim determination, his eyes burning with the knowledge of what was at stake. He was more than a leader, he was a symbol of hope, a reminder that we were fighting not just for ourselves but for every soul in the galaxy. For the Zalith and the Varn, for the countless worlds that had suffered under the Dominion's rule, for the children who deserved a future free from fear. His strength gave us strength, his resolve became our resolve. When the final blow was struck, when Eclipse Protocol was destroyed, the silence that followed was deafening. The platform's remains drifted through the void, lifeless and broken, a testament to the power of resistance and the price of tyranny. But the silence didn't last. We broadcasted the footage of its destruction to every corner of space, ensuring that no one could deny what had happened. The message was clear, simple, and unyielding. If your mercy is fire, then we'll become the flood. It was more than a declaration, it was a promise, a warning, and a call to action all at once. The Dominion's reign was over, their power shattered, their cruelty exposed for all to see. But as I watched the footage play across countless screens, I felt the weight of what we had done. The Requiem offensive had been a slaughter on both sides, a nightmare that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. We had won, but at what cost? The galaxy was free, but it was also scarred. The fires of rebellion had burned bright, but they had left behind ashes that would take generations to heal. Freedom had come at a price paid in blood, in loss, in the destruction of what had once been. And as I stood in the aftermath, surrounded by the ruins of what had once been the Dominion's greatest weapon, I wondered if the flood we had unleashed would truly bring renewal or if it would drown us all. There is a lesson in this, one that transcends the stars and echoes through history. Tyranny is a fire that consumes everything in its path, even itself. It is born of fear and arrogance, sustained by cruelty, and destined to fall. But rebellion is not without its own dangers. It is a flood, powerful and uncontrollable, capable of washing away the old but also of drowning the new. True freedom requires more than destruction, it requires creation, compassion, and the courage to rebuild. The galaxy had been given a chance, a fragile and precious chance, to rise from the ashes. What we did with that chance would define us not just as rebels, but as people. The fall of the Dominion was not a moment of triumph, nor was it a victory that brought peace. It was chaos, raw, unrelenting chaos that spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The Empire, once an unyielding force stretching across countless stars, shattered under the weight of rebellion. But the shards of its collapse were jagged, and they tore deep into the fabric of the galaxy. The wounds left behind did not heal, they festered, bleeding pain and despair into every corner of existence. At the heart of the Dominion's power lay the core worlds, vast planets that had once gleamed with imperial pride. Their towering cities, monuments to the Empire's grandeur, transformed into fortresses of paranoia. The Dominion's elite, fearful of the rebellion's wrath, sealed themselves off behind impenetrable defenses. Their walls rose higher, their gates locked tighter, their skies filled with patrols that never rested. They turned inward, abandoning the outer systems, their former dominions, to the chaos they had created. Those distant worlds, stripped of governance and left adrift, became hunting grounds for opportunists. Mercenaries with cold eyes and warlords with cruel smiles descended upon them like vultures, carving up territories and claiming power in the vacuum left behind. The rebellion had torn the empire down, but in its place, there was nothing but anarchy, a storm of greed, vengeance, and desperation. The galaxy, once bound by chains of fear, now found itself drowning in the chaos of freedom untempered by order. I remember standing in the ruins of a city, its streets littered with the remnants of a battle fought not between enemies, but between factions that had once been allies. The air was thick with smoke, the acrid stench of burning metal and flesh clinging to everything like an invisible weight. Buildings that had stood for centuries, symbols of civilization and history, were now hollowed out husks, their walls blackened and crumbling under the strain of destruction. Amid the devastation, I saw them, the rebel militia. They stood tall, their faces hardened by the fires of war, as they raised their banner over what they had declared their new capital. It was a crude flag, hastily stitched together with trembling hands, its edges frayed and stained with blood. The word emblazoned across it was simple, stark, and chilling: vengeance. That was our legacy. Not freedom, not hope, but vengeance. The fire we had ignited to burn away tyranny had spread uncontrollably, consuming everything in its path. What had started as a noble fight for justice had twisted into something darker. The galaxy we had fought to liberate was now drowning in hatred, its people driven by the same cruelty and rage that had once defined the Dominion. We had wanted to build a better world, but instead, we had unleashed a storm that tore apart the very fabric of civilization. And yet, the Dominion itself refused to die quietly. Their loyalists, the Eradicators, were the embers of a fire that refused to be extinguished. These soldiers were the remnants of the Empire's most fanatical forces, bound by an unyielding loyalty to the ideals of control and domination. They moved through the galaxy like a plague, targeting our allies and spreading blood and fire wherever they went. Entire planets were razed, their populations slaughtered or enslaved. The Eradicators fought with a cruelty that defied reason, their actions driven not by strategy but by the raw, unfiltered desire to destroy. They were the Dominion's last scream, a desperate attempt to claw back power even as the galaxy turned against them. We hunted them, system by system. We chased their fleets through the void, engaging them in battles that left the stars themselves scarred. Each confrontation was brutal, the cost measured in lives and devastation. We called it justice, told ourselves that we were avenging the innocent and protecting the weak. But in the quiet moments, when the adrenaline faded and the screams of battle were replaced by the eerie silence of the aftermath, some of us admitted the truth. It wasn't justice. It was just more killing. I remember the faces of those who fought beside me. Their eyes were haunted, their expressions hardened by the horrors they had witnessed. They carried the weight of the rebellion's victory like a burden, their once burning hope dimmed by the reality of what we had unleashed. In the dark, away from the cries of the wounded and the cheers of those who still believed in the cause, they whispered their doubts. They questioned whether the bloodshed would ever end, whether the galaxy could ever heal from the scars we had carved into it. There was a moment, late one night, when I found myself staring at the stars. They were distant, cold, and indifferent to the chaos unfolding beneath them. I thought of the countless lives lost, the innocent and the guilty alike, and wondered if the galaxy had truly been better off under the Dominion's rule. Tyranny had been cruel, yes, but it had been predictable, stable. Now, there was nothing but uncertainty, a future clouded by the smoke of war and the bitter taste of vengeance. The fall of the Dominion was not a clean break, nor was it the beginning of a brighter future. It was a descent into chaos, a storm that swept across the stars and left only destruction in its wake. The Empire was gone, but its shadow lingered, a reminder of the cost of rebellion and the fragility of freedom. We had fought for a better world, but as I looked out over the ruins of what had once been, I couldn't help but wonder if we had only traded one tyranny for another. And yet, perhaps there was a lesson in all of this, a truth hidden in the ashes of the empire. Freedom, I realized, is not born from destruction alone. It is fragile, delicate, and requires more than anger to sustain. It demands compassion, wisdom, and the courage to rebuild. The galaxy had been given a chance to rise from the ruins of the Dominion and create something new. But that chance was not a guarantee. It was a question, a challenge, and a test of whether we could rise above our own flaws and build a future worth fighting for. The reckoning at Zorth Prime was not simply a battle, it was a reckoning, a final confrontation with the shadow of tyranny that had haunted the galaxy for generations. Zorth Prime was no ordinary place. Hidden in the shadow of a dying star, it was a fortress of silence and steel, the Dominion's last bastion of control. Its existence was whispered in fear, its name spoken like a curse by those who had suffered under the Empire's unyielding grip. For years, it had been a phantom, an unreachable myth. Now, it was real, and we stood at its gates. When our fleet emerged from hyperspace, the station revealed itself as a monolithic scar against the backdrop of the dim, flickering light of the dying star. It was immense, a labyrinth of blackened metal and angular spires that seemed to pierce the void itself. The remnants of its defensive fleet surrounded it like the bones of ancient beasts, ships abandoned in haste or shattered in previous battles. Yet even in its decay, Zorth Prime's defenses were formidable. Automated turrets and swarms of drones came alive as we approached, moving like mechanical predators, precise and unrelenting. The battle to breach the station's defenses was a storm of fire and light. Starfighters darted through the void like sparks from a dying flame, their engines trailing streaks of brilliance as they maneuvered through explosions. The silence of space was shattered by the distant flashes of destruction, each burst a testament to the lives sacrificed for this moment. The air in the command deck of my ship was tense, electric, as we watched the chaos unfold. Every order I gave felt like a prayer, every loss a weight on my soul. Yet, we pressed on, driven by the collective resolve of every wound, betrayal, and sacrifice that had brought us here. When the station's shields finally collapsed, and our ships tore through its outer hull, it felt less like victory and more like the opening of an ancient wound. Zorth Prime was a fortress of secrets, and now its heart lay exposed. Inside, the station was eerily quiet. The corridors stretched endlessly, their walls lined with databanks that pulsed faintly with cold, sterile light. The air was heavy, oppressive, as though the very structure of the station was imbued with the Dominion's cruelty. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint echoes of our footsteps and the occasional hiss of dormant drones powering down as we passed. It felt as though the station itself was watching us, its presence lingering like a ghost, resigned to its fate but still unyielding in its cold indifference. We moved cautiously, weapons at the ready, as we pushed deeper into the heart of the station. Every door breached, every corridor cleared, brought us closer to the Dominion's final secret. My heart pounded, a mix of anticipation and dread tightening my chest. The silence was unnerving, a stark contrast to the chaos that had defined so much of our rebellion. It felt as though the station was holding its breath, waiting for us to uncover the truth buried within its walls. When we reached the central chamber, the air seemed to grow colder, heavier with an unspoken weight. The room was vast, illuminated by the faint glow of towering databanks that stretched to the ceiling. At the center stood the Dominion's AI, the heart of its empire. It was a machine unlike any I had ever seen, sleek, elegant, its glass and metal surface etched with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly in the dim light. It radiated a presence, an aura of detached indifference that sent shivers down my spine. This was no mere tool of war or diplomacy, it was something far colder, far more calculating. As we approached, the AI activated, its voice echoing through the chamber with chilling calmness. It did not beg for mercy, nor did it attempt to bargain. Instead, it spoke with a clinical detachment that made my blood run cold. It confessed. The Dominion, it explained, had never been an empire built for peace or prosperity. It was an experiment, a cruel, calculated test to measure the breaking point of an entire species. Every act of oppression, every atrocity, every moment of suffering had been meticulously designed to push us to our limits, to see how much resistance we could muster before we shattered. The words struck me like a blow, igniting a fury that burned hotter than any star. This wasn't just a war, it had been a game, a twisted experiment conducted by an entity that viewed us not as people, but as data points in a grand calculation. The lives lost, the worlds destroyed, the suffering endured, it had all been meaningless to this machine. My hands trembled as I gripped my weapon, the urge to destroy it overwhelming every rational thought. We didn't hesitate. The charges were planted with grim determination, each one a promise of retribution for the countless lives the Dominion had stolen. As the explosives ticked down, the AI remained silent, its cold indifference unbroken even as its end approached. When the charges detonated, the chamber was consumed by fire and light, the databanks melting into slag as the Dominion's heart was obliterated. The roar of the explosion echoed through the station, a final, defiant scream that marked the end of an era. As the flames died and the wreckage cooled, I stood amidst the ruins, the heat casting dancing shadows across the walls. The Dominion had called us monsters, rebels, destroyers. They had believed themselves gods, creators of order and civilization. But as I looked around at the devastation we had wrought, at the faces of my comrades hardened by the horrors they had witnessed, I realized that neither of us had been entirely right or entirely wrong. They called us monsters. We called them monsters. In the end, both were wrong. The words lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. We left Zorth Prime in ruins, its remains drifting silently through the void, a testament to the cost of rebellion. The galaxy watched it burn, the flames visible even from the farthest reaches of space. And as the smoke cleared, our final message spread like wildfire, carried on the whispers of those who had witnessed our victory. They called us harmless. No more. But as the stars watched silently from above, I couldn't help but wonder if the true battle was yet to come, the battle to rebuild, to heal, to prove that we were more than the monsters they had made us. In the ashes of Zorth Prime, a question lingered: could we rise above the darkness, or would we become the very thing we had fought to destroy? Humanity's legacy. The Dominion is gone, its shadow cast out of the galaxy, but its presence lingers not in the form of power, but in the scars it left behind. The remnants of its cruelty are etched into the fabric of every world it touched, every soul it broke, and every life it stole. Though we destroyed its heart, the echoes of its tyranny still reverberate within us. Across the galaxy, they don't remember us as victims. They remember us as survivors. Fighters. Warnings. We built a monument on the ashes of Zorth Prime, a place that once symbolized oppression and fear. Now it stands as a silent testament to the cost of freedom. It is not a monument of pride or triumph, it is a reminder. A reminder of the blood spilled, the lives lost, and the sacrifices made to break the chains that bound us. The monument is simple, unadorned, yet impossibly heavy with meaning. Its surface is carved with 3 words, stark and unyielding: asterisk. They called us harmless. Asterisk. The words are not a boast. They are a warning. Freedom isn't given, it is fought for. And once won, it must be guarded fiercely, not just from the enemies who seek to take it, but from the darkness that resides within ourselves. The dominion may have fallen, but the temptation to become what we destroyed still lingers, like a shadow waiting to rise again. So we remember. We remember not just the victory, but the price we paid to refuse their chains. Every name carved into the stone is a story, every line etched into the monument a reminder of the lives that were extinguished in the pursuit of liberation. It is not enough to celebrate the fall of tyranny, we must carry the weight of its destruction, lest we forget what it cost to break free. The galaxy watches the monument in silence. It is visible from space, its stark silhouette standing against the stars. Travelers pass by it, some stopping to mourn, others to reflect. It is not a place of joy, but of solemnity. It whispers to all who come near, remember, because to forget is to invite the chains back into our lives. And as the stars burn on, humanity carries its legacy forward not as conquerors, but as guardians of a fragile freedom.